Right, gonna quickly do a video on yeah, I guess what I would perceive as the future of human sexuality as daft as that might sound. Well, this kind of spans off from the sex dolls are hypothetical, I guess. Anyways, my idea is that in the future, human sexuality is going to change drastically. Sorry for the clicks, I'm doing something else at the same time. What I mean by that is right now, I think the marriage rate's going down. Much more people are staying single, less people are having kids. I think this is a worldwide pattern. I think it's more radical in Japan and also Western countries now. And actually, yeah, I'm thinking that the trend is going to go from, decreasing marriages and decreasing rate of childbirth to people are going to end up having sort of multi-way relationships, polyamorous relationships. I think they'll become more frequent, more normal thing as we go into the future. Then we'll probably progress to having sex with sex dolls and robots as basically our main form of sexual satisfaction. And then from there, we'll probably be able to create our own worlds and yeah, just entirely make whatever sexual fantasy we desire. So the first thing, the whole decline in birth rate and decline in rate of marriage. Uh, why I think that will happen is because, well, basically, there's already a decline in the marriage rate and the birth rate in Western and developing and developed nations, for example. And I think the reason for this is because technology is getting better. It's becoming more expensive and worse to have a kid in this climate. For example, if we were to have a kid many years ago, back when the baby boomers are around, it would have been a good idea. It was the right climate for it. But right now, people are realizing they can have a better life without children. That they don't really need to have children. And yeah, it's basically cheaper to not have kids, and better in a lot of respects to not have kids. Just because of the time restraints as well, and the fact that there's a lot of things you can do for yourself. It's hard to have a career in children. A lot of women especially want careers instead of children. A lot of men as well similarly don't want the responsibility of being fathers. So I think we'll move away from this. Women and such are a lot more sexually liberated than they've been in the past. If a friend of mine tells me she's gonna go to an orgy at night, I'm not gonna blink. That's pretty normal. I mean, it's not pretty normal, but it's not that unexpected these days. And I think in time, instead of having these one-way relationships, we're going to have three-way or four-way relationships, and eventually become polyamorous as we decide we don't want to settle down with a single partner. And the jealousy won't really factor in because I don't think we'll have one stable base partner to become jealous. And if we all have several partners, there's not going to be that jealousy because we're all going to be sharing this same kind of experience. I think as well people are going to become more bisexual and more explorative of new sexuality, including gender sexuality. If you've seen any of the feminist stuff recently, that's really on the rise now. The LGBT scene is much stronger and much bigger worldwide than it ever was. So that, in my mind, is how we're going to arrive at less children, less marriages, and more polyamorous relationships. The next step, I think, is going to be sex dolls. Now, sex dolls are starting to become a thing now, but they're not a massive thing yet. They're just kind of becoming a thing. We used to have simple ones, and a few people would buy them, but now, the flesh and whatever, it's kind of worth buying for someone who's lonely. I imagine at first, people are going to resist them, mainly women probably going to resist them. But in time, as they make better sex dolls for women as well and for men, I can pretty well guarantee a lot of people are going to start changing to sex dolls because they won't have to satisfy it and it satisfies them. It's like instead of hanging out with a beggar, you probably choose to hang out with someone who gives you $1,000 for no reason every 10 minutes. I think most people would rather do that, not because they're assholes and they don't like homeless people, just because people would rather do something that benefits them, or rather than benefiting someone else. I think when it's such a major benefit, and yeah, so for this reason, I believe that we'll move on to having sex with sex dolls. They'll be designed to be more physically pleasing, more aesthetically pleasing than other people, and you won't have to meet any demands with them. At first, they'll be kind of lifeless, but after a while, they'll probably turn them into more robotic, but with kind of dynamic personalities. And at this point, I think is where we'll see the most resistance. A lot of people saying, "Look, you can't do this. This is wrong." Because I think a lot of the population, it'll become like the new homosexuality. What homosexuality was maybe in the 80s. It'll become like that. Then a few years later, it'll become like what homosexuality is now, I think. And yeah, a lot more people will be having sex with sex dolls or sex robots is. And I think once these robots start developing, really intricate personalities and genuinely seem like they feel something for you or like they care about you, this is where you're going to see people opt out of having real normal relationships, as it were, and opt in uh, to having robot partners. I think robot partners will end up becoming very cheap. Maybe you'll be able to buy them for $400 or $300 at some point, and they'll have their own personality. They'll be able to look after your house. They'll be able to look after you. It will basically be like having a work slave that loves you, without it being a slave, with it wanting to love you, and with none of the drawbacks of having a real partner, essentially, or none of the seen drawbacks of having a real partner. And yeah, I can see why this would be appealing. I'd probably be interested if I didn't have a girlfriend already, although I like the dynamic aspect of having a human partner, although that could change in time. Maybe the robots will become dynamic. So yeah, the step after the sex dolls will be robots, and yeah, I think there'll come a point where these start to overtake real people in a way, and really get momentum. And once the resistance is gone from this, yeah, I think people will just make children in artificial wombs in the future, and have use these as their source of sex, and there won't really be that human-human relationship. And once that is established and VR becomes more and more complex, we'll eventually be able to include sensory input into VR, like you know, the input of touch, the input of smell might be included in VR, and we'll probably get VR simulated sex. We already have it, but I mean very complex VR simulated sex that's generated by someone else. Things that are generated by other people, sex robots online that are generated by other people. But once we can actually merge our consciousness with machines and store our souls and make our own worlds, I think what we'll see happening is we will actually be able to make our own companions completely to our own desires, maybe one at a time, maybe several companions. It really depends on how we feel, I guess. And I think that temptation, yeah, will overtake the normal dating game. I think a lot of people would much prefer to have everything they could ever desire straight away, immediately, uh, rather than take the chance on dating a human partner. I mean, there are a lot of off-limit fantasies and ideas that we can't do in the real world, because it affects and hurts someone. But if you imagine we could do this on the virtual world, an experiment like this without having to hurt an actual real conscious being, yeah, I think that most people will choose to have a relationship with what I would basically call themselves, but a figment of their imagination is probably a more precise way of saying that. So yeah, I think in the future we'll move on to creating our own, in our own kind of imaginary worlds, in our own heads, vivid sex and relationship companions, that we will, continue to sleep with. And I think the act of humans breeding with humans will probably cease, and it'll probably be a great time for all in terms of sexuality and sexual experience. and even emotional experience. Because you can program these things to understand you completely, and any kind of emotional problems you have, once the technology is good enough, they'll be able to repair. They'll just know. So yeah, that's what I think happens to human sexuality, and that's how I think it all. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.